Good evening, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Nick Rains here from Leica Academy Australia and Leica Camera Australia, introducing you to the obviously our new member of our camera stable. That is, of course, the Leica Q2 Monochrom, which you will no doubt have read about and heard all about in the various news over the last few days. Welcome to our launch. Now, obviously, we'd like to do this in person, but with things being as they are, we are doing it online. And what I'd like to do is to be able to show you the camera itself, and I'd like to put it in your hands because when you actually pick it up and feel it, you'll realize how beautiful it feels. So the best I can do is to actually move my camera view. Let me just see if I can do this. I'm going to drop myself out of the way with one clever little button, and I'm going to change to that, which should give me a nice close-up view of the camera, and hopefully the autofocus is going to work. And there it goes. So the first thing I want to talk about before I get into any of the details about the camera, and obviously we'll talk about some of the specifications, is just have a look at this lovely sort of stealth look that the camera has. It's got this lovely, discreet, matte black look about it. And when I first picked it up, I've got to tell you, I just went, oh yeah, that is just so gorgeous. And if you get a chance, drop in one of the shops and have a look. And when you pick it up, I'm sure you'll feel the same way. But whilst I've got it in close-up mode here, something else I want to point out to you, if I can get in the right spot there, is the Q2M is, and the Q2 itself, of course, is one of the very few modern digital cameras, except for the M, that has a genuine mechanical focusing mechanism. And you might wonder why I'm making a major point about that, because if you're into street photography, and we'll talk about this more when Knox joins us later on, one of the standard techniques is to set a distance and then shoot with the camera on a fixed distance. And that's actually quite tricky to do on an autofocus camera where you don't have a mechanical scale. You may have some sort of hybrid electronic focusing system, but it's really hard to judge. And this mechanism here isn't electronic. It's beautiful to the whole thing. And that makes it unbelievably good for street photography. So I just wanted to make that point whilst I've got the camera in close-up mode. But yeah, there she is, the Leica Q2M. And this is its little sister, brother, whatever you want to call it. This is the Q2, which I've got slightly out of frame there. And you can see it's somewhat more glossy with the big red spot on, but otherwise it's obviously the same DNA, same feel, same 47 megapixels and everything like that. So that's the camera itself. Let me just pop back to me, and hello, me back again. Let's have a talk about the camera itself. I've just got to swap to my presentation here, which if I can just do my keys here to a keynote, and then I'm going to share my screen to that keynote presentation. So I'm not going to bore you with too many technical details. So you should be able to see that now on the screen. And I think you'll agree that this sentiment that came from head office as one of our sort of sales tools is the fascination of black and white is as alive as ever. Black and white photography, digital or film, has become very popular, and there's quite a few people out there shooting only black and white, Knox being one of them. And there is something about black and white that really, really floats a lot of people's boats. And I'd just like to go through some of the features of the camera before we get to the more aesthetic side of things. Let me just get rid of that border for you. And so there's the camera itself. Without getting too dry on details, let me just go through a few of the technical specs, but I want to put them in context for you. I want to just explain why these things are important and what the consequences of them are. First of all, it's a brand new 47 megapixel sensor, and 47 megapixels is a lot. If you wind the clock back a decade, that simply wasn't even available to us. And now we've got it in a camera it's not a pocket camera exactly, but it's extremely small and discreet and highly, functional. So there's that, but it's not really the most important thing. It's the lens and the handling of the camera that gives it that, that just makes it a pleasure to use. The lens is a genuine Summilux lens, and if you compare it to the M Summilux lens, obviously for the M camera, It's optically astonishing. It's absolutely cutting edge technology, and it absolutely can pull out all 47 megapixels of that resolution. No question about it. And being f1.7, you do get that nice out of focus background, which I'll show you a sample of in a minute. The viewfinder is genuinely useful. And there are people out there who say, I don't like electronic viewfinders. Well, they're mostly people who've not tried one of the current crop of viewfinders from Leica or maybe a few other people. But that gives you a very realistic view of what you're going to be capturing. It's shrouded in black, obviously, because you're looking through a viewfinder. And so what you see, you can pretty well judge. And it's not the same as looking at the back of a camera. That's, the ambient light shines on it. It can look brighter or darker depending on the surrounding light. But looking through the viewfinder, nice and crisp. It's not too high contrast. You don't get that smeary look. So it's really, really good. High ISO. I'm going to talk a little bit in a sec about why the Q2M has such an astonishing high ISO ability. Obviously, it's to do with the fact that it's shooting in black and white only, but it does allow you to shoot in situations that you probably couldn't imagine shooting in before. I mean, really in, coal cellars. It's quite remarkable. And I would happily shoot this up to 25,000 ISO. 50,000 and 100,000, it's going to look a little bit noisy on your screen. But the thing is, when you make prints or you go to reproduction, that noise tends to disappear. So 25,000 looks good on the screen, but 50,000 is genuinely usable, and 100,000 is as well, maybe not at full size. So that's quite an astonishing step forward. 120-second exposures. That means that you can do those lovely shots with the clouds blur and the water blurs, which looks fantastic in black and white, architectural shots with that blurry water and the clouds whizzing past. It looks really great. The autofocus is extremely quick and accurate. It happens in the blink of an eye. I know I was going on a bit about the manual focus before, and obviously that's a huge part of it. But if you choose to use the autofocus, you'll find it's unbelievably quick. The lens mechanism is light. It's a 28mm lens, which means that the actual elements are only relatively small. So there's not much inertia in that, so that the motors can move the elements really quickly. And if you try it, you'll see that it just focuses almost instantaneously. When the Q originally came out, I used that camera a lot. And that was my impression of just focusing just like this. You can shoot video. So if you want to do arty black and white videos, you can shoot in 4K, which is quite a big deal. It's also IP52 rated for dust and water. So you don't have to worry about this camera if you take it out on the street and it rains. You just do your best to keep the rain off it, because obviously you don't want water on the lens because it will give you a blob in the shot. But you don't have to worry about the camera itself getting damaged. So that's a really big bonus. No red dot on the front for those that like that discreet look. And of course, it does connect electronically to the Leica Photos app if you want to copy your pictures off and put them on social media, within seconds of shooting them, if that's what you want to do. So those are the sort of the technical features. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that, but this is the lens itself. Now, I have spoken about this before, of course, but I do want to make the point that this is it's a genuine Leica Summilux lens. It's not an adaptation of something else. It's the real deal. It's real Leica glass, and it absolutely shows. And one of the things that I enjoyed about the original Q, which, like I said, I shot with a lot, was that when you shoot portraits with it, you can get a genuine out of focus background, which makes it look like it actually wasn't shot on a 28mm lens at all. So that's something like this, you see, that if you ask somebody what lens that was shot on, they probably wouldn't immediately say 28mm lens, because the giveaway is usually the fall off of focus, and you don't normally get that with a wide angle lens. So you can do really quite creative effects with that lens at f1.7. You've also got the digital zoom, which some people have been a little bit skeptical about, because it is a crop. It's not an optical change anyway. You're literally just cropping the picture to smaller amounts, which of course you can do in post. Nothing stopping you doing that. But the difference is that if you look through the viewfinder and you have the crop mode set, you'll see bright lines just like in an M camera. So if you've got the camera set to 35mm crop, you're still getting, I'm not exactly sure how many megapixels, how it drops down to, maybe 30, something like that. If you, maybe Connor would know what that is exactly and could put it in the chat, but it's still a pretty big file size. But you can see outside the bright lines. This is the key. So on an M lens, If you're shooting 35mm, you've got a 28mm field of view. You can see action coming into the shot before it enters the frame, which you can't do on a normal camera. So that gives you one effect. The other thing is, if you shoot RAW plus JPEG, you get the full RAW file, 28mm coverage, but you get a cropped version of the JPEG. So you're having a bet both ways. So I've found the Q2 and the Q2M's crop mode, particularly the 75mm one, genuinely useful for portraiture. And you still get f1.7 and a nice out of focus background behind the head, but obviously you don't get the full 47 megapixels. It's more like, I'm going to guess at about 10 to 12, but I'm not exactly sure. So there's that. Now, what is it about a monochrome camera that makes it special? This is the big deal with this camera. All black and white, all color cameras are really black and white cameras, with very few exceptions. There are some other sensors that capture all the colors at once, but the vast majority of modern digital cameras actually capture luminance information, which is just simply grayscale information. And the way the color is collected or recorded is essentially a bit of sleight of hand. It's a magician's trick, because each of the little photo sensor elements, as you can see in this picture, is covered by a colored filter. You have one red, one blue, and two green. And the reason there's two green is that your eyes are slightly more sensitive to green than the other colors, and it's trying to emulate the visual look of things. That means that you're measuring the brightness of the red or the blue or the green, but not at the same time in one photo site. The other thing is the blue sensor in particular is quite dense, and it actually removes half of the brightness of the light. So you get half the intensity. You lose one stop of sensitivity. So the idea is that when you shoot a color picture, and here's a picture of Brisbane where I live, and I'm just going to magnify part of it, that little box there. When you look at those individual pixels, that color has been calculated. It's not a genuine capture of color information. So it's kind of a cheat, and it does soften the image slightly. So when you've got this capturing information, you have to guess the intermediate pixel values. And that interpolation tends, not hugely, but a little bit, softens the picture, because some of that information is calculated and not actually captured. When you remove the Bayer array and you only have the monochrome sensor left behind with no color filters, you're not absorbing any light, of course, and you get, so the color one's on the left, the black and white one is on the right now, you'll see a much crisper result at edges. And if you examine a shot of the Q monochrome and the M monochrome, you'll see that it has that acutance, that sharpness, that crispness, which you don't see with normal cameras. It's subtle, but it's clear, absolutely. So you end up with a slightly crisper result and a really punchy black and white image straight out of the camera. Now, one of the questions I get, before we move on to Knox's work, is what is the comparison between the look of this sensor and black and white film? And the only information I've got to share with you at the moment is from the M monochrome itself. And you'll see that the sensitivity across the spectrum is very much like Kodak Tri-X film or Delta 400 used to be. So you have quite an even spread. And if you want to change the relationships of the colors and how they are rendered in black and white, you can put colored filters on the front of the lens, and anybody who used to shoot black and white film will understand what I'm talking about totally. And that is how you actually change the relationship. If you want a really punchy sky, you put a red filter on the front. If you want to lighten lighten foliage, you put a green filter on, and so on. So that's how that works. All right, that's the Q2M. That's enough of the technical information. If anybody's got any questions, please, for Knox, for instance, or for me, or about the camera, there's a couple of ways we can do this. Firstly, in the chat, we have Connor McGill and Ryan Williams monitoring that. So any questions you have, broadly speaking, they're very happy to answer your questions. Questions for Knox or even myself about the camera, please use the Q&A, and I will see those on my screen right here. and I will do my best to either interrupt Knox or save them for the end. So we've got Ryan and Connor on chat, and we've got Knox and Nick on the Q&A. So we've got quite a few people actually attending, which is really good to see. So please feel free to ask questions. All right, I'm going to move on to the next slide because it's time to welcome Knox. Knox, how are you?
Hey, how are you?
Good, good. You were sitting there very patiently as we go through this presentation, which you've seen before. Okay, so for those of you who don't know Knox Bertie, Knox is your chemistry teacher, I believe. You connect from Canada originally, and you have developed a particular look and style of street photography over the years, and you're also particularly interested in black and white analog chemistry and film as well, I believe. So maybe you could just introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a bit about how you got into photography.
Sure. Welcome and hi to everyone. My background is as a chemistry teacher. I did a chemistry degree in university, and was always interested in the chemical process. And I can remember in the days of university, I spent quite a bit of time in a dark room learning that, and just kind of kept playing around with that sort of stuff. I spent a lot of time when I first started teaching all over the world, and taught in international schools for a while, and always took my camera with me, and just really kind of developed a love for film photography, in particular playing around with the chemicals and the processes and developing looks through that. I've been in Sydney now for the last, it's been about 12, 13 years now, so I've been here for quite a while. And in that time, I've just spent a lot of time, documenting and shooting my daily life and things that I see around Sydney.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I believe that you shot film right up until you got hold of the Q2M. What prompted that that switch?
Look, I did, and I still shoot film. So I just never completely switched over. And when the kind of the trend of digital photography came along, probably for two reasons. I couldn't afford the cameras, and I had some pretty good cameras at the time. And so I just never went with that trend. And the process was really sort of meditative for me. I started talking to Leica, and Leica asked if I wanted to try this camera and try out how it works. And so really that was probably what preempted the switch more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. There's a picture coming up in your presentation, which we'll get to in a bit, that actually shows how similar the monochrome sensor is to film in so many ways, and I won't spoil the surprise because it was quite astonishing when I first saw it. We'll get back to that in a sec. Now, one of the genres that I've seen you shooting a lot in is these nightscapes in Sydney, and this particular picture we got on the screen here. We maybe just should talk a little bit about this project that you've been working on for a while, and we'll talk through these pictures and just explain how they came about and what you saw in that particular scene.
Sure. First picture that you see here is a shot that I shoot quite a bit. I'll often shoot my daily commute. I live in Tempe, in Sydney's inner west, and I live 5-6 houses up from a station. So it tends to be anywhere I go, I'm walking down to the train station, getting on a train, which is part of the reason why I shoot a lot of these shots. If I'm bored at night, rather than sitting around and watching TV, I'll often grab a camera, go for a walk, jump on a train, go into the city, and I really like shooting at night on trains in particular, because you get these kind of isolated sort of urban shots. They're dark windows, the fluorescent lights come out, and you get these people alone in these big empty carriages.
So we're on to the next one here and just see what's coming up there. Yeah, same sort of thing. But this isn't a night shot, though, I don't think, is it?
No, this was a few weeks ago, just on my way to work, and it was, if anybody in here is from Sydney, we had about 3 weeks of rain, and I was carrying the camera around, and the sun had just kind of come through. You can kind of see in the windows there's a bit of cloud there in the background, and there's still rain on the window. So just had the camera ready and sort of shot that small bit of sun that came in through the train on that morning.
Yeah, it's a moment in time. And I think that's probably one of the things that I was alluding to when I mentioned the manual focus on the camera, because situations like this, I mean, you probably had time to focus this one, but there are plenty of pictures where you don't get time to focus. So I know I've asked you this before, but how often would you use autofocus versus manual focus?
Generally for this type of shot, I'd always use manual focus because it's kind of what I'm used to. So, but I did start playing around with the autofocus a little bit. This one is actually an autofocus shot, and I was just playing around with focusing off of the seats to set it up. And generally, what I would do is get the focus set, and then wait for somebody to come into the shot, and then line the shot up with that. One of the things that I really liked about this camera in particular is the ability to go from manual to auto very fast.
Yeah.
And so because it's on the ring,
Yeah.
very few cameras you can do that. Normally you've got to go into menus or change things around, but you can just instantly just go autofocus, manual focus, and just pop it back and forth. And so depending on the situation, you can move pretty quick with it.
Yeah. Actually, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I was busy focusing on the new features of the Q2M. But in talking about the Q in general, I should point out to our listeners and viewers that the aperture ring is around the lens, and the shutter speed ring is an analog one on top of the camera. And you could, if you have them both on A, it's program mode. If you have one on A, it's that automatic. Have the other one on A, it's that automatic. If they're both off A, it's manual. It's unbelievably elegant the way that's done. There's no menus, there's no controls, no modes to change. You just set it as you want it. And I found it a very effective way of actually working. And obviously you found the same thing.
Yeah, and even the focus ring, you can just kind of very quickly pop up into that auto position, or pop back down into manual. So the ability to just kind of switch between the two is really fast.
Exactly. I'm sure you probably can't see it in my little thumbnail, but there is the M style focusing lug underneath the lens, bottom right, and there's a little catch on it which locks it into in and out of autofocus. Very smooth mechanism as well, which is really important. So yeah, I'm glad you raised that point. So this is one of the pictures that when I looked through your original pictures to select for this presentation, it really struck me as being very sort of evocative. And maybe you could tell us how this came about.
This I'm just waiting on a platform. I'm at Sydenham Station, which is just one station down from where I live. The platform's empty. To get back to Tempe, often if you miss a train, there's a 30-minute wait, so I get stuck there quite often. And it's where I'll normally sort of shoot through windows and just get those kind of shots, just because I'm sitting on an empty platform, really by myself. This train had just pulled up, and so the door was actually about to open in this shot, and I actually had the camera everything just set on auto on this one, and it was quite literally just a very quick, almost from the hip sort of shot of this girl that was staring out the window. You can't see it in the picture, but the lighting of the girl, there actually is a fluorescent light. There's a set of seats there, and there's a fluorescent light over the set of seats, and so the fluoro light is what's lighting the girl and makes her sort of stand out in that picture. And you can kind of see the fluoro lights in the background in the windows at the top.
Yes, I can see what you mean. It's that little gesture of light which lifts the picture up remarkably. If people see me looking down, it's because I've got a little monitor here with Knox's work on it. So I'm not sort of looking away. I'm looking at the work and examining it closely, because every time I see the pictures, I find something new to look at, which is really nice. Okay, here's another one from the train series. This is a very strong one as well. Can you tell us a bit about this one?
Same sort of thing as I described before, and it's this is actually at Redfern Station. I popped out at Redfern Station, and again was just waiting for a train. Because it's a 28mm lens, this is pretty close. So I'm almost touching my chest to the train in this shot. I've got the camera up above my head. And again, I was playing around with the autofocus on this. So the camera's above my head. I'm not framing the shot, and then just using the autofocus to see what I can get from that. I generally sort of overexpose these shots a little bit as well, which is what gives that sort of really bright sort of fluorescent sort of look to it. And then the fluoros are so light that it cancels out really anything in the background, which gives a lot of blacks.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
probably one of the things I like about this and in these types of shots, and I quite liked, is sort of the detail in the face through the glass. Probably shows a lot of maybe what the camera can do, but there's I really like the sort of grayscale that came up on the skins in this one.
yeah, absolutely. Now I'm going to take an opportunity to answer a couple of questions that have come in. Well, 2 comments and 2 questions at this point. Ian Porter wants a Monochrome CL. We've had a few people wanting a Monochrome SL, so maybe we need to push the word up to head office and say, let's have the full set of Monochrome cameras. I think it'd be a great idea having a Monochrome CL. Russell Shakespeare says, no question, just loving the work. So that's Russell. Thanks, Russell.
Thanks, Russell.
Now, Tim Suter. Hi, Knox. Tim from Sydney here. I know you've had a chance to shoot the M10 Monochrome before the Q2 Monochrom. What advantages does the Q2 have over the M10 in your style and workflow?
Look, they're both great cameras, and in a lot of respects, the just so you're aware, my go-to 35mm camera is a 1932 Leica 3A with a 35mm Sumer on it, and I've been carrying that around for years. And so there's actually a lot of similarities between that camera and the Q2, but there's also some similarities between that camera and obviously a Leica M as well. But it's different and unique in its own right. Both interesting cameras and do kind of very different things. The sensors to me had a lot of similarities, and so the files that came up from both cameras when you look at them and process them on the screen are very similar, but they do force a sort of slightly different sort of shooting style. I'm pretty analog in the way that I work, but I can't lie, having some of those features on that, I started using them pretty fast, and you get quite addicted to being able to operate pretty fast. And the thing I liked about the Q was really, it's pretty fast. You can move pretty quickly with it.
Yeah, I completely concur with that. The M Monochrome is a beautiful thing. The Q Monochrome, I don't know, having those extra little bells and whistles there sometimes just saves the day. It really does. It's a nice little fallback position. And now then, another couple of questions before we move on. Ian Picken, do you use spot or field focusing, and also focus peaking assistance?
I don't use focus peaking assistance, but generally, if I'm in a strange lighting situation, I really grew up learning spot focusing, and I use spot focusing for mostly everything. I very much use this camera like a film, like I would use a film camera. And generally, the technique in film is you should be exposing for the shadows and then developing for the highlights, but I don't do that, which is part of the reason why you get such heavy blacks. Is generally I'm exposing for the highlights and also developing for the highlights, which gives that sort of black look. And really, I just did the exact same thing with this camera. So I used the spot meter a lot, which worked very well. And then the rest of it, I either had the camera set on auto, or because I'm so used to working with manual film cameras, I'm just setting it by instinct of what I know. Especially in the kind of subway sort of shots, I kind of know what the setting should be. So I just set it to that and go for it.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm just going to change pictures on the screen. This one's been up a while. We'll come back to this picture, but I've got a couple more questions coming in. We'll just get through those, and then we'll move on to the talking about the pictures. Peter Meyer would like to know how much post edit is done on these general, and that's also a question from Andrew Reeves as well. So I don't think you do a lot of post, do you, with these pictures?
The one that's on the screen right now, I think there's almost exactly zero post editing done on it. This is pretty much what came out of the camera. I might have tweaked a little bit of contrast on it. I honestly can't remember, but it's not something I really enjoy doing. I'm not a guy that really enjoys being in Photoshop and playing around with photos. I really do more so enjoy getting it right in the camera and being in the dark room. In saying that, probably the editing that I'm doing in this would be exactly how I would either edit in the dark room or how I would edit if I was scanning film.
I'm with you. Yeah, yeah. Have you ever, just this question for me actually, have you ever tried changing the JPEG settings in the camera for contrast to see what the results are like, or are you strictly shooting raw and that's that?
I did play around with that, and it was really interesting, and you get really interesting results. And the thing I liked about the JPEG settings is that the files that came up with the JPEGs probably looked closest to me to film. So if you are trying to get sort of a film look, particularly at high ISOs, the way that they were processed, you do get a really interesting texture. It's different to film, but it's, you know, some digital cameras, it's different and ugly. It was different, but I quite liked it, and it had a kind of a unique look to it. The rest of the shots were all shot in RAW. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's a really good way of putting it, actually, because it is, when obviously we transitioned as an industry from film into digital, there was always this comparison is I can't get my digital shots to look like my black and white film shots. And I always used to say, well, you're never going to, because they're different. They can both be awesome, but I don't think you can ever make them look the same because they are such a different process. And it seems that you've brought them together in a really good way, so that looking at these pictures, even when you look closely, and I mean magnified, it's really hard to tell that they were actually shot on a digital sensor. There's that organic grain, which we'll come to in a sec, which is quite remarkable. A couple more questions. Kenneth Wang, what is your preferred f-stop for these kind of shots?
This one I'm shooting at Sunny 16. I think I was on Sunny 16 and I just brought it back down to f11 or potentially f8. I can't remember exactly for this shot, but I sort of start at Sunny 16. For anybody that doesn't know what Sunny 16 is, I'd start on 400 ISO. Roughly, you match your shutter speed to the ISO and you have an f-stop of 16. And in a bright light situation like this, and the bright light is obviously the light from outside that's coming in on the woman's face, your lighting should be pretty good. There's a little bit of a tint to the train windows, so I would have backed it off to an f11 or an f8 to account for that.
Yeah. See, that's experience. You see, a lot of people, including myself, wouldn't have actually thought that the windows, of course, are tinted. So you're probably losing half a stop of light. So nice little tip there for people shooting manually. Gary Gordon, hi Knox, I'm impressed that you have the 3A, a classic. I've used the 3A for black and white pictures a long time. What differences do you find using black and white film versus the Q2 Monochrom in terms of dynamic range, graininess, and which do you prefer? That's a tricky question to answer.
Yeah, look, I've spent my whole life shooting film, so that's a tough question. Film to me is as much about the meditative process to shooting film and being in a dark room. And I'll never stop shooting film just because I love shutting the door to a dark room and playing around and seeing what I can come up with. The best way that I could describe this camera in my reaction to it is if you've shot a lot of film, particularly from something like the 3A, when I compared the pictures, the lenses are actually very similar that I was using, and actually the results from the lens were very comparable. But the files I really liked because they compared to scanned film, and so there's a lot of dynamic range in them, and there's a lot of dynamic range to be able to play around to either get blacks or pull the highlights back. And I always felt that if I slightly exposed, I was never in a situation with this camera where I thought I've just lost all the whites and they're gone, which any other digital camera I've ever picked up before, that's always my first complaint. I put it down straight away because I think for the style I'm shooting, this just isn't going to work.
Okay, all right. I'll move on to the picture. I've still got we've got a lot of questions, which is really good. It's excellent asking questions and getting answers because it's interesting for everybody. But let's move on to some more picture. Now, this one did strike me as a very powerful image. Maybe you better just tell us how this came about as well.
This was just on my way to work, and the train is rested on the platform at Central Station. I'm sitting on the end seat, and I'm got the camera pointed out towards the platform, and the picture of the woman with the mask on is a reflection in the glass. And the glass on these trains, they bend, and in the bend you get these kind of like double and triple kind of bits and pieces, which you can see is kind of like that outline of her face. The two kind of streaks of light going through her is a reflection on the glass from the lights that are behind. And then obviously the woman sitting on the bench is inside of her is the woman that's sitting on the platform. So it's really just a reflection off the glass on the train.
Yeah, it's a really interesting sort of optical illusion. And as I said, when we did our media briefing the other day, I didn't actually see the woman on the seat in the bottom there until you pointed it out. So it's a multi-layered shot, which I think is very, very clever. I do like that one. But I think you can see also, I'm not sure if it will come through on the screen for the viewers, but that's very organic looking. That's very film-like. I mean, I know film-like is not necessarily a goal that everybody might have, but that organic thing seems to appeal to people, even if they don't necessarily know that's what's appealing to them. Would you agree with that, Knox?
Yeah, I'd say so. And I think this shot probably is it's a really good example. It's a really high ISO shot as well. And so I purposely was just playing around to see what a high ISO shot would come out of the camera. And I can't remember exactly what it was on, but it was very high. And I mean, generally that's what came out of it. And again, I think, as I said before, you know, sometimes you look at sort of digital noise and it's just not pleasing. You just don't like it. I was actually really happy with it. You know, when I put this on a big screen on a computer and really kind of zoom into it, I was really happy with what the kind of noise looked like.
Yeah. I think I've found the same thing when I've had a brief look at I've only had the camera briefly to play with, and I didn't shoot anything vaguely interesting, thing like this, of course, but you can still take some pictures around the house and shoot at 50,000 ISO. And I did have to look twice at the metadata a couple of times to go, hang on a sec, it is 50,000, like crikey. So it is quite shockingly good at high ISO. Quok has a question. Oh, sorry, Quok, I'll come back to you in a sec, Quok. I've missed a question. Shane Dahl, are you using any of the color filters that you can put on the front of the lens?
Yeah, this shot has a red filter on it. I often shoot with a red filter on a film camera. I shoot yellow filters, red filters, but red filters are one of the kind of the goes that I use, particularly in artificial lighting. If I wasn't using a red filter here, her face would have come up really very gray.
That's very true. Yeah,
and just wouldn't have had the same sort of look to it. And so what the red filter does in this situation is creates that real white to her face, which is the reason why it's sort of glowing. And I quite like that kind of ghostly glow that you can get with a red filter. I played around with a lot of filters too on it. There's a couple shots in here where I had a red filter, a circular polarizer, a neutral density filter. So I play around a lot with filters, and yeah.
That's impressive. Quok, hi Knox. Quok is in the process of either having just bought a Q2M or about to buy a Q2M. So just to give you a hint. Hi Quok, hi Knox. Do you mix the darkroom process? Do you mix the darkroom process when shooting digitally, or is it accomplished in the final print photo? Sorry, is accomplishing the final photo paramount? Both your film and digital photos achieve the same resonance, he thinks.
Look, it's a really good question, but Nick, I'm not sure if you'd agree with this, but I think sometimes the photo and the image is in the photographer, and it comes out through the camera, and the camera becomes a tool. And either the tool can be a mechanism that will allow that to happen or not allow that to happen. And so it never surprises me when a shooter shoots on film or on digital and it looks relatively similar, comes out with a similar style, because mentally I think you're trying to get to the same ends.
Yeah, that's a really interesting answer, actually. I do agree with you having explained it like that. But yeah, that is a good way of putting it. You tend to sort of converge to a certain degree. Amit, Knox, what ISO would you normally go up to at the maximum when shooting at night? Does the Q2 have an advantage, presumably over the M or the Q2 itself?
I very briefly had an M in my hand, so I don't want to speak out of turn with what it can do. It was very good as well, and I shot that at night a bit while I had the opportunity to use it. like you said, Nick, you can shoot this at anything. You know, if I wanted to freeze a shot or shoot at a, you know, a bigger f-stop at night, I would be very comfortable shooting this at a very, very high ISO and be confident that the pictures are going to come up really well. For anybody who is a film photographer and absolutely loves films will probably hate me saying this, but this was definitely one area where digital beat film. You know, with a 400 speed film at night, you've got to be really precise with how you're working, and oftentimes you're dealing with, you know, wide open, you know, shutters, and you got to be super still or think of things to lean up or set the camera down, where it did kind of free up my ability to take shots at night that I would have never had the opportunity to take with a film camera.
Sure. Now, I owe Kwok an apology because I noticed he corrected his question about 3 or 4 questions down, which I missed. And when he said, do you mix the darkroom, he meant, do you miss the darkroom process when shooting digitally? Whole different question. Apologies for that. So yeah, do you miss the darkroom process? But I think you've answered it in the sense that you do both anyway. So still, sorry about that.
No worries.
Right, next one. Let's dismiss that one. Jay Horton. Does whoops, my screen just went weird on me. What? There he is, back again. Does infrared work on the Q2M as it does on the M9M, the original monochrome? Do you know? I don't know that for certain. Maybe Connor can chip in. I'm sure it will do, because I noticed in the spectral response curve that we put up on the screen earlier, it does extend up to 750 nanometers, which is infrared. So have you tried anything in the infrared range? With
No,
no.
Sorry, I haven't.
Yeah. Jay, I think the answer is a definite probably, but I couldn't be there for sure. If you ask the question in the chat, if you haven't already, then Connor and Ryan might be able to find out for you. Okay, let's move on. There's still some questions here, but it's time to change the picture. Now, this was the image that I thought showed up how non-digital the monochrome sensor style can look. So can you tell us what we're looking at here, Knox?
Yeah, for sure. So this is, I took this shot while waiting for a train 5-6 p.m. after work at Central Station. I'm standing on the platform, and this woman just walked by me. I've got, in this shot, I'm using a red filter. This is the one where I had a circular polarizer and a neutral density filter on. I think the shot was shot with a 1 second exposure, and the woman is in bright daylight. And so what that allows me to do is, even with a 1 second exposure, to be shooting at f/16 and still not blow out the highlights or the whites, and then you get that movement within the shot. This picture in particular, it's a tiny little bite-sized portion of the actual picture, and it is a crop, and so it's cropped in, and it's probably something like 1 pixel or something. It's absolutely tiny, and then blown up afterwards. And I did blow this up in Photoshop afterwards to the same size of pixels as all the other shots that come out of the camera to see what it would look like. Yeah, and that's what it looks like. Yeah,
that was remarkable when you explained it in the previous discussions, because to me that looks exactly like, you know, chemical film grain, which coming from a digital sensor is actually makes no sense at all. It's amazing. So yeah, very impressive one. A couple of questions I'll come back to. One of our regulars is called Anonymous Attendee. I don't know if it's the same person each time, but anyway. Hi, Anonymous. One question. As an M user, I am wondering how you like the electronic viewfinder. There's a good question.
Yeah, it's, you know what, I wasn't sure, and I'd never used a camera with an electronic viewfinder before. I really liked it. There's a couple things I really liked about it. I didn't notice until the second day that I was shooting with it that the viewfinder is in black and white. And then once I realized that the viewfinder is in black and white, I really like that, because it really does give a preview of what the shadows and highlights are going to look like, and just takes out all of that color that kind of changes. And so it did change to some extent how I was viewing through a viewfinder. The other point that I probably would raise is that the electronic viewfinder was definitely better at night. and had a big advantage at night for any of the night shots on the train. I was able to focus better, and I really liked it. It moves fast as well. Like I was expecting that it would have sort of a jerky movement across the screen as I'm moving, but it wasn't anything. There was none of that, and so it just felt like a regular viewfinder in a lot of respects to me.
That's great. I believe it's a 60 frames per second refresh, I think, which is pretty quick considering 24, 25 is sort of movie speed. So that's why it's not got that sort of jittery look to it. Let's move on to I've got a few more questions, but let's move on to picture wise. Okay, we're going from train pictures to graphic architectural stuff around Sydney. Again, yeah, just talk us through this picture, Knox.
Okay, this picture is it's just outside Central Station in Sydney. Late afternoon sun. There's a couple streets that you can walk down to get to George Street that nobody basically walks down. They're very empty. And there's these beautiful kind of, I don't know how you describe the architecture of this. It always reminds me, I'm a big fan of George Orwell, and I kind of picture these buildings in 1984 because they have that sort of like, Ministry of Speak sort of look to them. And when you put this kind of light to it, it's I don't know, I find it quite interesting. And so I'm just using Sunny 16 here. I've got the camera set to infinity, so I can very quickly shoot any sort of situation when somebody comes into the frame. And I'm ultimately shooting more like probably a landscape photographer here, and then waiting for people to walk into the frame, and kind of more looking at sort of that combination of whites and darks and trying to line up how that kind of works.
Yeah, and the figure, of course, is critical to the shot. So with just a question for me, with a picture like this, how long, and in general, how long do you find that you're waiting? Or, I mean, are you shooting and waiting a lot to get just the right person in the shot, or are you moving on to other scenes?
Yeah, it's probably more dynamic than people would think, because you're also dealing with light, and light changes fast, and in the city, light changes fast with buildings. And so, this building is in this light for this period of time, but then it's blocked by another building 10 minutes later. And so I've shot a lot in Sydney, and I kind of know where to go now, and kind of where you're going to pick up bits of light, and sort of have these kind of reference points in my mind. At a certain time, I should be walking through this part of the city. And the other thing I think that's really interesting, if you get to know a city, cities are built in grids, and at different times of the year, the sun is either shining through the streets or shining at diagonals to the street, which can also change where you're going and where the light's going to go off the building. And so on that night, I came to that spot knowing that at that time of year, at that time, if you get light, you're going to get some really interesting light coming off the buildings. But I sat there probably for a good hour and didn't take a lot of shots, maybe 3 or 4 shots where somebody actually walked through. It was pretty empty street.
And then this is, I believe, the same place. Is that right?
Yeah, this is quite literally, I'm standing in one location with my camera. And like I said, I was there for a good hour. And this really is just a 180-degree turn in the other direction. And so if I were to go back 3 or 4 shots before this, you'd actually see this guy walking through the other shot, and then he walks into this shot. And so really I was just following him as he walked along the street. And I think the thing that probably caught my eye, I often don't shoot in portrait, but I quite liked how the guy was walking with that curve, and then it sort of mimicked what the lens distortion did to the building, which I quite enjoyed. Yeah,
no, that's really cool. Questions. Amit again. Knox, do you generally shoot at between -1 and -2 exposure compensation, given that you are on a low ISO generally? Is that true to say?
Good question. It depends on how I'm shooting. So in these, I'm shooting manual, and so you're not dealing with exposure compensation. But when I did use it on automatic settings, I had it either at -1 or -2 all the time. And the reason why I do that is because I am looking for blacks, and where if I was on 1 or 2 in the harsh lighting situations that I'm shooting in, you'd blow out the whites.
Yeah, I don't want to do that.
Which film would do that as well. So if you shot regular on film and and just shot with normal exposure and didn't underexpose, you'd be in the same situation.
Okay. Good-o. All
Yeah.
right. Oh, not a question, statement. Richard Smith, lucky my Q2M arrived today. So congratulations, Richard, as the owner of a brand new Q2M. That's great. Sherwin Spencer, how do people Sherwin, how do people respond to you photographing them on trains, etc.?
I think after years of doing it, you can get very good at going by unnoticed. It would be maybe once a month that anybody would ever notice me taking a photo on a train. You get very good at figuring out how to hold the camera and how to move, and with a wide angle lens, you can point a camera in a way where it doesn't seem like you're taking a photo of a person. It looks like you're taking a photo out the window. And then if I do get caught, generally I just smile and say hi and have a conversation with the person, and usually diffuses the situation. So I can say in lots of years of shooting, I've very rarely been in a negative situation.
Yeah, that's pretty much what Jesse Marlowe says in his workshops as well, and his discussions is, you just get used to this way of working, and then every now and again somebody might say, what are you up to? And it all depends on how you present yourself, doesn't it? If you just own it and come across as just a pleasant sort of person, most people are very happy to have a conversation. So yeah. All right, let's move on to another couple of pictures, then we'll do another couple of questions, and then we're probably getting towards the end. So this one I love. I think this is terrific. So this is just the timing on this one has got to be just exquisite, I think.
This shot is right in the center of Sydney. I'd gone in on the train. If you can kind of see, for anybody who does know Sydney, you'll see the T in the background. That is the T of Event Cinemas on George Street.
Yeah,
and there's that laneway that connects the two streets. What I liked about this shot is this is right in the middle of a very busy Saturday. I stood in that one position for a long time that day, and the light kind of traveled and moved around that spot. I really liked how the light was bouncing off that sign to the left, which to me really mimicked the kind of like diagonal lights that I get on trains coming through. So to me, that really fit the series. But there was just timing wise, this one lined up where the light was coming on the woman, and there just happened to be, for that split second, no one else there, which gives that real feeling of a deserted or isolated city.
Brilliant. A couple more questions. I think we've had as many questions, if not more, than any other event, which is great. It's just been coming thick and fast. Kwok says that's Wilmot Street, by the way, in Sydney. So thanks, Kwok. Ingrid Hendrickson, I'm used to editing my images to monochrome, so presumably converting to monochrome from color, and like to be in control of the image look. What are the major differences, stroke advantages you find in using this camera to, what are the advantages compared to taking a picture to black and white in Photoshop or Lightroom or something?
Look, I'm probably not the best person because I don't have a lot of experience with digital cameras. And so I'm more used to kind of shooting on black and white film and seeing that anyway. So to me, the process wasn't a whole lot different of what I was looking at. The one thing I would point out, if you work in a more traditional sense, you can control the contrast in the camera a lot better with this because you can use filters, and it's a more traditional way of shooting black and white, which I really liked about this camera, where if you throw, as you know, a red filter on a color camera, you just get a red shot.
Exactly.
And you try to edit that afterwards, and it really just doesn't do anything but make a washed out photo.
Yeah, that's right.
And
that's correct.
But I think it's also interesting to point out that, you know, the files that come up are different. And I've spent a lot of time in a darkroom staring at grayscales and getting in really close to looking at grays that come up and analyzing that. And I think from any digital camera I've ever shot before to this one, the thing that really caught me about the files, probably that is different from converting from color, is the grayscale is quite unique to this camera.
Yeah, that's absolutely, that is in a nutshell the difference, really, because it is the way a monochrome camera works is just not the same as capturing color and converting to black and white. You might be able to get awesome results either way, they're just a different path. And the thing about the filters is it changes the light coming into the lens onto the sensor, which is not the same as changing the color of the image after it's been onto the sensor. It may sound like we're splitting hairs, but the difference is quite, appreciable, definitely.
And Nick,
go ahead, please.
Sorry, I think I raised this with you before. The one thing I really did like about this, and it's probably been the thing that more than anything has really kept me shooting film for so long, is the edges of the black and white when you're shooting high contrast. When you shoot on any digital color camera I've ever picked up and shot, what you tend to get is sort of black and white, and then you get this kind of weird strip of a line in between the white and black, and no matter how much you try to edit it or play around, it's always there. But I think this shot's a really good example of that, because if you look at her back and the black of her back and then the light of the street, you just see black and then grayscale, but you're not seeing that kind of outline that you would see on a color digital camera.
See what you mean. In fact, thanks for reminding me, because we did discuss this last time. And if you imagine the Ansel Adams type shot with clouds and blue sky, if you use post-processing from a color image to darken the blues using selective color or something like that, if you go too far, particularly with architectural shots, you get a very strong white line around the transition between the object and the sky. You don't get that with this camera if you put a red filter in front of it. It is because it's a different process. You're changing the color of the light coming in, and you're not fiddling around with it afterwards. So that's a great example. Thanks, Knox. I'll do one more picture and then some more questions. This might even be the last picture. So this is a bit of a departure from the other pictures, which are very urban.
Yeah, this one's pretty urban too. This is a jacaranda right at the entrance to Tempe Station, just near my house. The lighting of this is the very bright fluorescent lights that kind of hang over it's one of those classic A-frame stations, was built a long time ago, 1880s. And at the very top of that kind of A-frame stairs, there's these super bright lights, and the bright lights are hanging over this jacaranda. And it's right at that time where the jacaranda is just coming into bloom, and those purple, like the bright purple leaves of that were just catching that fluorescent light so beautifully, I thought. And it just gave this, I thought, a very, very surreal sort of lighting thing. I take a lot of these shots. I take a lot of shots of trees for some reason. I find just the interesting movements of trees and light and dark and how it falls on it, but particularly trees under man-made artificial light, I find interesting.
Yeah, I didn't actually realize this was with fluorescent lights. I saw this as a sunlit shot with a blue sky, but that's because I'm more of a landscape photographer. Now you mention it, there was something about it that I found just a little bit strange, and that explains it. It's a very different quality of light. So that's remarkable. I think that's the last picture. Yes, it is. And we're finishing on this one. So we still, don't go away, Knox, because we still do have a few more pictures, a few more questions. So I'm just going to unshare so that people can see us. That's better. Should be able to see Knox and myself there. And we'll just finish off with any last questions that people have got. And there's still half a dozen to go. So if you're okay sticking around for a few more minutes, we might as well continue. Stephen Godfrey, has the COVID-19 situation changed your street photography practice? Are you enjoying things being a bit more empty?
Yeah, well, I quite like empty shots. I'm sure for a street photographer that likes busy shots, it's probably not the best thing in the world. But for me, I quite like people isolated within scenes. So yeah, it's been interesting. Probably the biggest change I would say is I'm still not so sure about pictures of people in masks and not seeing the details of people's faces. And it does change the mask, but probably years from now, we'll probably look back and love these shots because it's a period of time in history, and, and have a unique look to them as well.
I suppose I have the same problem with people looking at phones. I think that's cheating because they're not going to notice you.
Yeah, me too. I do try to get nobody on a phone, but it's very, very hard thing to do.
It's really hard. Simon Ross, hey Knox, love your images, in particular the dreamlike quality that comes with your darkroom work. These sensors are so precise. Do you see yourself spending more time in the digital darkroom to emulate that, or will it give rise to a different aesthetic?
Yeah, good question. I doubt I'll ever become a guy that spends a lot of time with post-editing shots. It's not where my interest area lies. But I will shoot this camera a lot, and I am interested. I'm really open to see where it goes and how it changes the shots, because it will change the aesthetic, and I'm not sure where that aesthetic will follow with that, but it'll be interesting to see where it goes, I suppose.
Absolutely. Okay. Tim Suter again. Knox, who do you think has influenced your style more than anybody else? Photographers, cinematographers, any influences?
Probably more cinematographers, painters than photographers. I probably later in life got more into looking up photographers and figuring out, who's good and looking at that. But I'd also say, I read a lot. I read a lot of books, and I'm probably more influenced by the kind of, this will sound strange, but more the thoughts in my head. And so I use the example of George Orwell in 1984. And when I'm out looking at scenes, I kind of imagine what I think that would look like more so, or, a shot on a train or something like that. Probably in terms of cinematographers, we're really influenced by Kubrick's early work in the way he frames shots. I love his films and how he balances a shot and how he frames a shot. He uses a lot of the same sort of diagonal streaking lighting that I use. It's really common sort of technique that he would use in his shots. And so that's probably my strongest influence, I would say.
All right, good. I'd never thought, Kubrick. I mean, how could you not be influenced by his look, I suppose? Next question, Dean Koopman. In the Outback, and I've gone back to using my M6 film camera. Congratulations, mostly because they don't sell it because they're getting very valuable M6s. Their prices are going up because they're tough cameras that do remarkably well in harsh, dusty conditions. My Type 240M didn't like the heat and dust. Do you consider this camera tough enough to use on an assignment?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I definitely would. I've been carrying this around. It's been pretty hot. It hasn't left my shoulder in 2 weeks. I'm bumping into people on trains. I've taken it through the rain. I'm not being overly nice to it, to be honest with you. It hasn't missed a beat for me, so I'd be pretty confident with this camera. Yeah.
Well, if you look on the bottom of the SL2 and the Q2M, you'll see this IP52 number, and if you Google that, this dust and water protection, there's an enormous list of different standards that cameras and other instruments are tested to. And this one is tested to a particular standard of IP52, which means it's not just a claim, it's actually an industry standard that this is built to. So these are absolutely water resistant, which also makes them dust resistant as well. I mean, you wouldn't dunk it in a bucket of water or, throw it in the sand exactly, but they will, they are tough when and it's also, I know the SL2 is milled out of aluminium, but I can't quite remember what this one is made out of. Connor, can you help me out there? I do know it's a little bit heavier than it looks, which means to me that it's metal, which means it's tough. So that's a good recommendation. Yes, Ryan says, yes, it's milled from aluminium. So there we go. So tough, weather sealed camera. That's Dean. I'll just take these last three and then we'll call it an evening, I think. Quack again, hi. Hi Knox, have you tried the Q2M with flash? I'm curious to know how flash settings might differ given how easily the sensor can have blowout highlights.
I did play around with a couple flashes on it. I also played around with it with a strobing bike light in the dark on trees just to see what it would look like. It handled pretty well with a flash, but when I was shooting the flash with it, I'm probably not the best guy to ask that question because I'm actually purposely trying to blow out the whites to get the look that I'm looking for. So it worked really well for that. I don't use flashes all that often, so I'm probably not the best guy to ask.
Okay. Last two questions then. Slight gnarly one. This is quite funny. Do you, as is Tim Suter again, do you ever secretly shoot color, even if it's just for yourself? You don't have to answer that.
No, it's a good question. I do. If I'm in a city or if I go anywhere and I run out of black and white film, I will go to a chemist or a drugstore or wherever I am and buy color film. And so any of the kind of color shots that I've taken, it's because I've run out of black and white film, can't get my hands on it, and I'm buying cheap color film and taking shots with it.
Good answer. Good answer. I love it. And last one, Norbert. Hi, Knox. You're teaching chemistry. Do you involve your students in your photography? And if so, do you get influenced by the view of a presumably younger generation?
I'm a high school teacher, and so I'm quite careful about, you know, the relationship between what I do privately and as a teacher, and I think all teachers have to be aware of that sort of stuff. I teach all of my students black and white processing and the chemistry behind that, and we go through. I think the last time we spoke, we talked about Kodak, Tri-X, and Rodinol. I teach students how to make Rodinol in the way that they would have made it in the Second World War.
Wow.
Which was out of, you know, common chemicals that you would have found either in a drugstore or in a, you know, in winemaking and things like that. And so what I do is I teach them how to isolate the chemicals to make the, you know, the same processes. And then we develop it and look at the prints, we look at the film, and then we compare it to the shots of the greats who shot in the Second World War to see if we can emulate the grain structures that they had that you can't in modern films.
Okay. I wish you'd been my chemistry teacher at school. That sounds absolutely awesome. And on that note, I think it's time to call a close to the proceedings. I'd like to thank Knox hugely for sharing his time with us and his very subtle insights into not only photography, but also this rather lovely camera. So thank you from everybody. Well, hopefully speaking for everybody when I say thanks, Knox, for taking part. The camera is in the stores, of course. Well, if there's any left, they've been quite popular. And I do urge people, if you are interested, to get your hands on one. It's all very well having me tell you about specifications or read them online or whatever, but the feel of this camera is something else, and it will make a big difference. You'll probably pick it up and go, oh my goodness, where's my credit card? All right, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for taking part. I'm just going to swap my screen to a picture of this lovely camera, and I'm going to just leave it there for a few minutes whilst we all disappear. So thank you very much for taking part.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Nick.